Good evening, everyone. Well, that was an afternoon I wasn't expecting to see. Moving on swiftly. Hi, Mrs. Purple. It's good to see you over here in the land of YouTube. It's very different over here. It's a lot quieter over here. We could anticipate some trouble, but hopefully not. Hey, Donna. Hey, Michelle and Hope in Action. I hope you are all doing well. So we're going to do the Southport murders. Obviously, I've covered it over on my TikTok, but I'm actually able to show you. There was a special program done on ITV, so it's kind of a little bit different. It's much better over here because I can show you things a lot better. I need oh, I don't know. YouTube can be just as toxic. YouTube has been toxic. I've seen it on the US side, but it can be toxic over here. But it's not at the moment. And when I first joined TikTok, when I was doing my thing, it wasn't toxic. It just wasn't. But obviously, this is what happens. Toxicity is everywhere. However, let's focus on the girls and we can talk about the toxicity another time. But we won't get any trouble over here. Hopefully we won't, because they'll be watching out for me over on my TikTok being live to come in and spam the comments there. So obviously with the Southport murders, we know that this was a mass stabbing. It targeted children in the Heart Dance studio. And we know, sadly, that 3 children were murdered. There was the attempted murder of 10 other people, 8 of whom were children and 2 of which were adults. And this was during the school holidays. They just started. And this was during a Taylor Swift dance workshop. And there was 25 children in there. And obviously we had the sentencing yesterday, and that brought out some stuff that we didn't know. And honestly, when I heard some of the stuff, it was just horrendous to hear. But just as an overview, what I want to do is, hi Sophie, is just go through. Hang on a minute, where are you? So on the day of the workshop, it started at 10 a.m. It's led by the dance teacher and a colleague of hers. Now, Rudakubana is the person who was found, well, pled guilty to the murders. And we know that there is a long history of him he was the face of the Children in Need advert at one time in his life. So you can see that his parents were engaging with him at some point. You know, he was given experiences and opportunities not many would have. And over the time, once he reached of a certain age, he started to get out of hand, and there was involvement with different agencies. Clearly that didn't help. But from my perspective, what I'm seeing is that the parents tried to engage with them and work with them. Some people think differently. That's their place to think that. But I feel that, you know, if your child is being referred to the prevent program, you're doing something, because you're obviously reporting your child. You've called the police. They've got concerns, and the referrals have been made, also with the support of the school as well. Now, he searches online for information on the Mari Emanuel stabbing, and this was a knife attack that happened in Australia. Now, at 11:10, he is seen leaving home. Well, not leaving home, but he's seen going to the bus stop. He's wearing a green hoodie. He's got that surgical mask. He's obviously got some sort of fetish with these masks, because he wears them all the time, even in court. And he heads down to where the girls' dance workshop is. Now, at 11:11, he is captured at the bus stop. Then he makes a call and gets a taxi. At 11:15, he heads around 11:15. It says after around 5 minutes, he heads back home. And then at 11:30, he's picked up and then he travels in silence for the 4.5-mile journey to Hart Street in Southport. Now, I will show you a map. Let me just change the screen. This case is horrible. Like, it was horrible to listen to everything yesterday. I think it was that one. Right, so this shows you the map here. So that's where the taxi arrives on the map. That's the master's repair shop. And then you can see the dance workshop, how close, and you can see where the attack begins. It's all very close together. I mean, they didn't stand a chance. Now, when he arrives, he asks the driver to direct him to 34A, but he refuses to pay the driver and then follows him down a driveway towards Master's vehicle's body repair at 36. Now, here is that video. Here's the first video. Oh, hang on. So that's the first video. He's on his phone. Asshole. And then here's the second video. These have all been released by the police now. And that's where he turns back, walks back. That's him in the taxi. And that's the map. So at 11:44, Rudakubana retreats after the owner of the car repair workshop confronts him, telling him to pay the fare, and he replies, "What are you going to do about it?" You know, if he's not paying, he ain't got the money. He ain't paying, is he? Now, inside the dance studio, on the first floor of the industrial unit, which is down the path of the main road, the children are gathered around tables making bracelets with the life-size model of Taylor Swift, which stands nearby. And kids are obviously having pictures with it. And, they're just having a nice bloody time. And then he walks into 34A Hart Street, which is the building, climbs upstairs to the first floor, opens the door armed with a black-handled kitchen knife, and without saying a word, he grabs the girl nearest to him and then does what he does. So this is the CCTV footage, if you haven't yet seen it, of him approaching. That door to the right is open. He tries that door, can't get in. And then he goes to the door on the right, and that's the entrance. Now, at 11:46, CCTV shows one child as she tries to escape the building, but she gets dragged back in by Rudakubana before she staggers out and collapses. Then the police get their first call. Then the emergency services get their call, and this is obviously the points that they're showing where people were. So you've got witness that stopped to help an injured girl is carried to the street, and he's seen holding the knife. That's one of the witnesses. And that's kind of what it looks like from above in the picture. This is obviously Google Maps. Got to love a bit of Google, ain't we? We do love a bit of Google. And then they're just the tributes. Let me just come to the... let's see. Do you, Hannah? Yeah, there was some stuff going off near the court, wasn't there? Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. The guidelines on medicines change all the time in pregnancies. I mean, basically, even a pharmacist is going to be reluctant to unless it says by the manufacturer itself. You've got to be really careful. And like I said, the guidelines for medicines are changing all the time. So, I mean, I've not practiced for quite a few years now. It obviously has paracetamol in it, but I don't know what else is in the fluid capsules. I personally don't take them. There you go, Mrs. Purple's answered at paracetamol. Yeah, paracetamol, not ibuprofen either. That's not allowed. Oh, yeah, oh, no, bless you. Yeah, you know, you've got to be careful. Pregnancy is not fun. They didn't tell you about all the medicines you can't have. You just kind of think, oh, I'll be able to have some ibuprofen and this. No, you wouldn't think cold and flu, would, Right, let's change the screen. So this, I'll have to pause it to give commentary as it's, fair use and everything. So this is the ITV News special coverage. I haven't seen it, but we're going to see it together and see what has to be said. I'm pretty confident that they won't have gone into any more detail than the judge went into yesterday. That was bad enough. And then I will play the judge's sentence and remarks for those over here who obviously don't go over to TikTok. So let's rock and roll.
Girls, which happened a mile down the road from here last summer. Today, 18-year-old Axel Rudakubana was jailed for a minimum of 52 years for murdering Elsie Stankham, BB King, and Alice De Silva Aguiar, and attempting to kill 10 others. The judge said it's likely he'll never be released, but he couldn't give him a whole life order as he's too young. Mr. Justice Goose said he had no doubt Rudakubana had wanted to carry out mass murder against innocent, happy.
And I just have to say there has been an appeal put through for an unduly lenient sentence. But, I mean, I don't know, because this is one of the heaviest sentences passed for someone of his age. And the law says he can't have a fixed whole life order, but there are exceptional circumstances when the crime is exceptionally heinous. And I don't know about you, I feel this crime is exceptionally heinous. So fingers crossed that they might even turn it into a whole life order, but we'll see, because when we see these appeals, the justices and that don't often change their minds.
Young girls, and he would have killed more if he'd been able to. Rudakubana wasn't in the dock to hear his fate, as he'd been repeatedly disruptive. But the court heard harrowing details about the attack and the injuries to the victims. We've chosen not to broadcast the worst of them because they are extremely distressing, and the families have requested that the most graphic accounts of the injuries inflicted are not broadcast. But a warning that this report from our correspondent Ben Chapman still has content that you may find upsetting.
He is chillingly calm, considering what he is about to do. This is Axel Rudakubana in the back of a taxi.
Number 34A, yeah.
Asking for directions to the dance class he'd chosen as his target.
Are we cash your card, mate?
Moments later, he's filmed trying to enter, at first by the wrong door, before eventually disappearing upstairs. Within minutes, he'd stabbed 9-year-old Alice, 6-year-old BB, and 7-year-old Elsie multiple times, along with 8 other girls and 2 adults. He had no clear motive, police say, except violence for its own sake.
He had a long-standing obsession with violence, killing, and genocide. His only purpose was to kill, and he targeted the youngest, most vulnerable, in order to spread the greatest level of fear and outrage.
He arrived at court to face punishment for that atrocity last July. But as the hearing began, he disrupted the proceedings. The judge told he hasn't been eating for days. He started shouting from the dock that he felt ill and needed to see a paramedic, despite having been checked and deemed fit. Alice's father shouted, "Coward," as the judge ordered him to be removed. And so he wasn't in court as details of the horror he inflicted was heard. How he'd systematically gone round the room with his knife. Children who ran were chased down. One who escaped pulled back inside. And he didn't hear the impact statements from his victims. Alice's parents said, "Our dream girl has been taken away in such a horrible, undeserving way that it's shattered."
I'm not going to lie. It would have taken all my restraint to have shouted more than coward at him. And him behaving in the way he did in court yesterday. I mean, who cares if he's having chest pains? I don't care if he's having chest pains. I don't really think anyone cared, but they have to do their due diligence. Anyway, they did their due diligence and took him out. He did want a second opinion because he didn't believe the first opinion. He'd been on hunger strike as well. I say hunger strike. Apparently, he hadn't eaten for about 10 days. Well, I say give him some Calpol and then continue the proceedings. And if he continue, like I said, stick a sock in it and wrap the tape around his mouth so he can't make a noise.
Our soul. Living life without Alice is not living at all. Elsie's mum said, "He took our daughter, her life, her future, and everything she could have been. There is no greater loss and no greater pain." More upsetting still for those families, the revelation Rudakubana had gloated to police about their deaths.
He stated that he was happy. He was happy that some of those children had died. It was completely distasteful. It's something that shocked us as an investigation team.
What does it say, do you think, about him?
It shows that he's absolutely no remorse. He doesn't care what he's done.
The knife he used that day was identical to this one, bought online a fortnight earlier, despite him being under 18. When police searched his home, they found an array of weapons, an Al-Qaeda training manual which included how to kill with knives, and under his bed, a tub containing the toxic substance ricin. It hadn't been used, but 0.5 milligram is enough to kill an adult.
That's insane. The house that he lived in looks awful, I'm not going to lie. But that the weapon is just makes me want to
He chose not to come back to court to hear the judge sentence him to at least 52 years in prison.
In my judgment, his culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose. Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation, he will serve almost the whole of his life in custody. I consider at this time that it is likely he will never be released and that he will be in custody for all his life.
For the families of the victims, how long he will serve is just the first of so many questions that need answers about that dreadful day. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Liverpool Crown Court.
The impact these attacks have had on the families of those who died and on the survivors were described to the court in emotional victim impact statements. They included dance teacher Leanne Lucas, who was seriously injured. She said she's now surviving for those who didn't make it. And a 14-year-old girl described the blind panic during the attacks. She said attacking defenseless children was sickening. Here's Ellie Pitt on the heart-wrenching testimonies.
Inside this building today, we heard from the survivors of this attack. In their own words, they told the court about their lives since that day in July. The first, a 14-year-old girl who had the bravery to address Axel Rudakubana while he sat outside the courtroom. She said, "The thing I remember most about you is your eyes. You looked possessed and you didn't look human. You stabbed me in the arm and instinctively I turned, and that's when you continued to stab me in the back. All I could hear was the screams. I ran out onto the landing and there was a group of girls huddled and I began just screaming for the girls to get down the stairs. I was physically pushing them down the stairs to get them out of the building and get away from you. I knew I was running for my life. I remember thinking we need to get away, as you weren't going to stop. I knew from your eyes you wanted to try to kill us all. Heidi Liddell was teaching the dance class. She and one of the girls ran into a toilet and managed to hide from what was happening on the other side of the door. She described the torment of surviving today. I replayed the incident over and over in my mind, changing the sequence of events so that myself and the little girl I was with in the toilet were stabbed and killed. I started to think that maybe I should feel what the pain was like to be stabbed, as I struggled mentally with not being physically injured and felt guilty for this. Dance instructor Leanne Lucas put on the class because she wanted to make a positive impact, but told the court today she has lost her purpose. She was stabbed 5 times and has had multiple surgeries. The impact this has had on me can be summed up by one word: trauma. He targeted us because we were women and girls, vulnerable and easy prey. For Alice, Elsie, Bibi, Heidi and the surviving girls, I'm surviving for you. Those who lived now carry with them the weight of what they saw.
And how awful when you hear the impact statements and how it's affected their lives, and like how Leanne obviously now feels that she can't do the line of work that she wants to do, that she wanted to do, that, you know, that she trained to do, because she doesn't feel that she can protect the children. I think it's really sad that the knock-on effect for everybody involved is going to be lifelong. And I agree, he was 17, he was almost 18, and it wasn't like it was one murder, it was 3, 10 attempted, and then the ricin. And 52 years is a hefty sentence for someone of his age, obviously, because it's not been really done before. But these people are going to have to live with this terror for the rest of their lives.
What they heard and what they've lost. The 14-year-old girl said today, though, that while Rudakubana lives behind bars alone, our family will do our best to move forward. Ellie Pitt, ITV News.
Let's speak to our correspondent, Ben Chapman, who spent the day at Liverpool Crown Court. And Ben, we can't underestimate just how harrowing and upsetting day it was in court.
Yes, it has, without any doubt, been the most distressing and emotional day I've ever spent in court. From the anger, the utter contempt shown by Axel Rudakubana towards the victims' families and the survivors who gathered across 2 courtrooms, to the truly horrific detail of the injuries he inflicted on such young children. Some family members had to leave the courtroom to avoid hearing that detail, and we have chosen not to report much of it because it is extremely distressing and because the families have asked us not to. And just as moving were the accounts of the impact this has had on those who walked away, from the survivor guilt felt by the organizer of the event, Leanne Lucas, to the defiance of the father of a 9-year-old girl who described his daughter as a hero. Everything Rudakubana is not, he said. And then the unbelievable courage of the young victim who read her own impact statement to the court. The judge made clear today that if Axel Rudakubana had been 18 at the time of these attacks, he would have received a whole life sentence today. Because he wasn't 18, that sentence wasn't available to the judge, but he will spend at least 5 decades behind bars. And that's without answering the question that we've all been asking since last summer. Why? How could he have targeted such young, vulnerable children with such extreme violence?
Ben, thanks very much. Well, the Prime Minister said tonight the atrocity in Southport was one of the most harrowing moments in our country's history, and has stated that Rudakubana will likely never be released. Well, let's go to our political correspondent, Harry Horton, who's at Westminster for us. And Harry, there have been calls tonight, haven't there, to change sentencing laws?
Yeah, that's right. As Ben was just saying, because Axel Rudakubana was 17 when these attacks took place, he wasn't eligible today for a whole life sentence. Had the attacks happened just 9 days later, he would have been an adult. He would have been eligible.
And I think he probably did that on purpose. I think he probably knew that. And probably what they've found in his search is he's probably asked about that, because what we do know with a lot of these cases where people have committed a crime and a murder before they get found, the first thing that they do, which is really stupid, is to Google, how long will I get for X and Y crime? How can I avoid X punishment? And so we probably will hear that, because obviously there is going to be a public inquiry. It's going to be interesting to see what comes of that and what comes out, because I think this is the only way we're going to get to know a little bit more. I honestly don't think Axel would have spoken. I don't think he'd have testified. It's his right to not testify. He doesn't have to. And so I don't fully know, other than the fact that he was targeting children, females, women at this dance studio, and the fact that he had a very, very, very bad and in-depth fascination with all things morbid. And obviously he obviously didn't have a particular religion that he subscribed to. Maybe he was planning on starting his own, who knows? But his intention was to cause terror. He did. He caused pain and suffering, and he took the lives of those sweet, sweet children.
Eligible for a whole life sentence. Now, the Southport MP, Patrick Hurley, has said today he thinks the law should change so killers in cases like this would be treated as adults for the purposes of sentencing. The Conservative Party leader, Kemi Badenoch, has also said she thinks there's a case for amending the law. That's something she says her party will be looking at. Now, the sentence has been referred to the Attorney General's office tonight for being unduly lenient. The Attorney General's office said in a statement the threshold for that being successful is very high. They would need to find that the judge had made a gross error based on the range of sentences available to them. The Prime Minister, in his statement, echoed the words of the judge, saying that this vile offender will likely never be released. I think all of this will be looked at by the government in the coming weeks, and then eventually by the public inquiry as well.
Welcome back to Southport. On the day, Axel Rudakubana was jailed for a minimum of 52 years for the shocking knife attack right here, just a mile down the road, last July. He showed no remorse since his arrest, nor throughout the trial. It's still not clear why he did it. But he was known to authorities, and there are growing questions about why he wasn't stopped. Here's our social affairs correspondent, Sarah Corker, on the missed opportunities.
Obsessed with extreme violence, Rudakubana spent hours watching horrific content online. How did this seemingly ordinary schoolboy become a mass murderer? The teenager was well known to the authorities. He'd attacked before, but the red flags over his behaviour were repeatedly missed.
The perpetrator had contact with a range of services, including the counter-terrorism Prevent system.
In fact, he was referred 3 times to Prevent from the age of 13 for viewing violent material on school computers. And 3 times his case wasn't escalated because he didn't fit the definition of a would-be extremist.
And that's the thing with Prevent. I've had some dealings with Prevent. There's a checklist. If they don't meet the criteria, then they don't work with them. And they probably get so many referrals, and they probably sign them off quite quickly as not a risk. So where these behaviours picked up, which I think if he was being reported to police and he was having these interventions, they weren't, the fact is his behaviours weren't being ignored, but the behaviours couldn't be managed even with the help, And I do think to some extent there is this, well, he's underage, we don't want to be arresting him because he'll have a record and he'll probably be okay. And they've probably tried to kind of put it to one side, not push it to one side, but like be like, you know, he's just kicking off, he's going through this, that and the other, just got to support him, we'll put some things in place, everything will be all right. And everything wasn't all right. And this is where I think the services have let everybody down, because the parents can ask for all the help in the world, but if the police come and say they're not going to do anything, what can they do? Nothing. If they refer him to Prevent, which they did 3 times, what can they do if Prevent say that he's not a risk? Nothing. And it's for the authorities and the police and everyone else to step in and say, hey, we've got an issue here and we need to deal with it, rather than kind of just, you know, pussyfooting around and brushing over things. Do you know what I mean? I feel that the services definitely did some letting down here.
The absence of evidence of a motivation means that these acts have not met the legal definition of terrorism. But to be clear, that does not make the horrendous acts any less terrifying or terrorising for those impacted and the whole community.
Prevent failed to deal with him properly, but all the warning signs were there. In 2019, he was expelled after admitting taking a knife to school at least 10 times.
He came back here 2 months later, using a hockey stick as a weapon to attack other children. Police later found a knife in his bag, and when asked why he was carrying it, his chilling response was to use it.
He was convicted for those crimes in the youth courts, and in the years that followed, police were called to his home in Banks in Lancashire on at least 5 occasions, including for hitting his father and carrying a knife on a bus. He was never arrested. He later attended a specialist school after being diagnosed with autism, but staff called the police after he was absent for nearly a year. There were repeated referrals to safeguarding services, but there was only ever limited intervention, and he stopped engaging with those services. There are now concerns that vital information was not shared effectively.
It is an absolute requirement that if there is a suspicion of danger from an individual, all those authorities should talk to one another as a matter of urgent necessity. We need to find out whether they did. I doubt it.
And just days before the murders, the teenager attempted to get a taxi to the school he'd been excluded from. His father stopped him, but you can see he's wearing the same green top and surgical mask as the day of the attacks.
I'm really concerned that every agency of government of the state prior to the attack in July of last year failed catastrophically.
Described as pure evil and calculating. We may never know why Rudakubana brought horror to Southport that day.
And the questions tonight, aren't there, Sarah, over his contact with mental health services?
There have been catastrophic failings by multiple agencies, including mental health services, to identify the risks he posed, because they knew he was dangerous. They knew he'd attacked before. They knew he'd carried knives, yet the interventions were always limited. ITV News has found out that school staff, when they visited his home, they actually asked for police to go with them because they were so concerned about his disturbing behaviour which escalated over a 5-year period. Yet it seems that the contact with mental health services was always limited. They won't tell us what assessments they carried out, what interventions.
Well, that's new, isn't it? A new bit of information that we didn't know. When you've got to take the police with you because you have concerns and you are scared.
If any, they made. And there's been a real lack of transparency around that. They say they can't comment until a safeguarding review has been carried out. That is due to start in February. But let's be clear, there have been failures after failures. And even now, his parents are facing questions over whether they should have done more. Police have confirmed to ITV News they are investigating the family.
Okay, Sarah, thanks very much. Well, there are also questions over the handling of the riots which followed the attacks and the disinformation which fueled the anger.
Well, that's interesting that they are investigating the family. If the family have called for help several times, then the police didn't, like they said, the police were there on several occasions, one of them because he hit his dad, right? So they have actively called the police and they have actively asked for help. So it's all good and well investigating. The only thing that I would say that they might be able to get the family on is if there's occasions where they haven't reported an incident. And the big one is where his dad stopped him from getting in that taxi that day. Because obviously, if his dad didn't notify the police that that's what he was going to do, maybe this could have been stopped. Now, in the US, that would, that person would be probably had for an unlawful death suit, as in you didn't help prevent the death because you stopped him going to school with a knife, but you didn't report it to authorities. Now, I don't know if he did or he didn't. But it will be interesting to know what comes of this. But it's all right for the authorities to be like, well, let's push it back on the families now. We'll go back and investigate them. If you didn't do what you were supposed to do, there's only so much that the family can do as a parent. And that's the worrying thing. So what happens now if his family, even though despite calling the police and begging for help, they say, well, that's their fault. What do we do as parents when one of our children grows up and goes through some difficult times and we're in a position where we're calling the police and the police aren't doing anything? Are we all going to be taken and tried for the offence that the child may go on to commit? Or are we actually going to look at the problem here, which mental health services are diabolical? And again, the families who reach out for help need these services to help them. And if they're not helping them, stuff like this is going to continue to happen. Makes my blood boil.
Yeah. Prosecutors, police and politicians are all facing accusations that they could have quelled the violence if they'd been more open about what they knew. Here's our UK editor, Paul Brand.
It was the night that social media created anti-social madness on the streets of Southport. They hurled bricks and fireworks, fueled by accusations thrown online. Police in riot gear left trying to contain violence that even they feel now could have been countered in other ways.
There's a real need to look at this criminal justice process. And as we know, the Law Commission have already started that piece of work around looking at the contempt of court legislation. I felt in the events following the 29th of July that I wanted to be able to say more around the misinformation and disinformation.
Under the Contempt of Court Act 1981, you're not allowed to say or write anything publicly that could prejudice a trial. On paper, that rule applies from the moment a suspect is arrested, though in practice, the risk is seen as much greater once they've been charged. For example, we were able to broadcast this CCTV of Axel Rudakubana after he was arrested, but before he'd been charged, and to debunk the myth that he was an asylum seeker or a Muslim. But as rioters began feeding off their false theories in other towns and cities, the question is whether authorities should have told us more.
Southport looks almost nothing like it did when I was last here on the night of that riot. That is mostly due to the determination of this community to heal any divisions that others had tried to create. But the weapons of the far right that night weren't just fire and bricks, they were disinformation. And there is a fierce debate now about how to disarm them in future.
Because too much information can pose its own dangers.
I saw Joanna Yates that evening, no.
In 2010, Christopher Jeffries was arrested over the death of Joanna Yates. It turned out he was innocent, but hardly treated as such in the days after his name was made public. In recent years, the law has begun to prioritise the privacy of suspects.
We're blaming those who are protecting and upholding the rule of law for unlawful and criminal rioting and public disorder that we saw on our streets. We all know who's to blame for that. It's the people who did it themselves, the perpetrators. And I think we should think long and hard before upending a system that is there to serve the interests of justice.
For now, the government's priority is to crack down on social media speculation. After all, both murder and mayhem in Southport were driven by warped content online.
Now, Paul, this is one of those rare cases that could lead to significant changes, couldn't it?
Yeah, because it's raised so many questions here, not just about how much information should be released about a suspect when they're arrested, but also, as we were hearing from Sarah earlier, about what is classified as terrorism. Tonight, still, Axel Rudakubana's actions aren't classed as terrorism because there wasn't this underlying motivation. The government, we know, wants to look at that. The Prime Minister has said that he believes misfits, as he's called them, should potentially be classified as terrorists. The government's also said this week it wants to crack down on young people buying knives online to remove damaging content, the likes of which Axel Rudakubana was looking at. But the one question I think we may never get the answer to is how was it that Axel Rudakubana was so depraved, so evil, that he could do what he could do? It went against every single human instinct to look at a child in distress and to continue to hurt them. Only he knows the answer to that tonight, and it may well be that that is the one power he chooses to continue wielding over the victims and the families as he spends at least the next 52 years in prison.
Okay, Paul, thanks very much for that. Let's get an update on the story that's dominating our programme tonight. The sentencing of the Southport killer, Axel Rudakubana. He's been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 3 young girls and the attempted murder of 10 other people. He must serve a minimum of 52 years. The chief Crown prosecutor said it was one of the most harrowing cases that she'd ever come across.
Every time I look at his picture, I'm like, what the fuck? His eyes are proper scary. He looks deranged. And, like, you know, we've just learnt that together about the police going in to the home as well because the teaching staff were scared. And obviously, we've also learnt that they're going to be investigating, obviously, his parents as well. Which fair dues, you know, it is part of the process, but let's not deflect from the fact that there were people that let him down. The mental health services let him down. The Prevent let him down. He was, I wouldn't say let him down, let everyone else down because of the lack of actions that they took has led to where we are today. Could they have stopped him? I don't know. But I think when you've got a child that's going off the rails and the parents are asking for help and they're giving you signs that he is clearly disturbed in some way, and you're kind of just, I mean, without knowing what input they put and whether they just checked him off and went, nah, he's all right, or, you know, how they got to their conclusions is really difficult to know. We don't know, right? So we don't know how often the parents call for help. We know they did. And that has to be commended. It's no fun calling the cops on your own kid. I've been there. You have to do it for the safety of yourself and your other children. You have to do it. So to do that takes balls, right? And they did. They called the police. They asked for help. And he had all these multi-agencies working with his family. Now, whether they revealed parts of things or everything, we'll never know until we know, if it comes out in the inquiry, what they reveal to them. But they also have the ability to assess his devices. If the parents say that they're concerned, they could check his devices, you know. But if the police say, well, you know, we don't need to do anything, he's just, you know, kicking off, he's just a teenager, he'll grow out of it. Maybe I was just having a word with him or put him on the straight and narrow. And if they think that that's good enough, well, that isn't good enough. It's never going to be good enough. And I think they don't really like to engage too much with you know, teenagers that are kicking off, because a lot of them do think that they'll change. And to most, they do. I honestly thought I'd probably be talking about one of my children on a live like this one day, but that's not the case, and I don't say it lightly. But I was terrorized. But we made it through, and they now live a normal life. They have a good job, and they've come out on the other side. But this could easily have been me. This could be anyone. No one is free from any of this. No one. You know, it can happen to anybody. So when they're saying about checking the family out, yeah, absolutely. And certainly you need to investigate the day that his dad stopped him from going to that school. But don't deflect from the fact that you fucked up. The governmental services, the mental health services, the police services. Don't deflect from that. Accept you fucked up and look at what you're going to do differently, because there will be more boys like this. There will always be another Axel.
His purpose was to kill, and he targeted the youngest, most vulnerable, no doubt in order to spread the greatest level of fear and outrage, which he did.
The court was shown footage of Rudakubana travelling to attack the children and heard how he had a long-standing obsession with violence. He showed no remorse. Alice De Silva Aguiar, BB King, and Elsie Stankham lost their lives. The mother of Elsie called Rudakubana a coward in her statement, saying what he did was pure evil. Well, joining us now is Sarah McKenty, who lives in Southport. She has a young daughter, and they, like many other residents, have been badly impacted. What happened here last July? Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time.
You're very welcome.
To talk to us this evening. Now, your daughter was meant to be at that dance class and was friends with many of those victims.
Yes.
Within her friendship groups, how have they been coping with what happened?
I mean, I think nothing prepares you for what happened here, and nothing prepares you as a parent for what happened here. I think as adults, we have all of this baggage. We understand perhaps a bit more about the world, and we're now facing a situation where our young people, our children, are having to learn more about the world than we ever imagined they would do at the age of 9. But I think for us, it's talking, it's communicating with parents and understanding what other parents are doing.
Yeah. And what was it like for you when you realised what had happened, and then having to try and process that, yes, as an adult, but helping your daughter to process that?
I mean, she often asks about it. She's brilliant. We're a military family, so we have that level of resilience that I think perhaps others don't. I mean, I'm thinking back to the day now and the sheer disbelief of everything that was going on, and then the subsequent day when we had the riots as well. I mean, it all now seems like a distant memory because the last few days have completely taken over. But I think that there's so many different thoughts that go around in my head and go around in her head, and she asks difficult questions, and I can only answer those.
I think what was hard for many of us, as I'm sure it was for you, was the horrific details that came out in court today. How was it for you to listen to just how violent those attacks were?
So I started to read what was going on, and then I think I've needed to be a little bit kind with myself, and I think we'll begin to read more details over time. At the moment, I don't know whether or not I need to know those, and of course, as a parent, those details will be online forever. So she, at some point in her life, as will the other children, will probably read those. And that's really challenging too. But today has been a day like no other. I mean, the details are horrific.
And I know you said that you're from a military family, but how do you as an adult begin to process and begin to protect your own mental health with, yes, everything that's happened since July, but especially the details that have been released this week?
So, we still feel quite scared. We feel very angry. We feel lost in some ways. I mean, there's so many different things that go around in our head. And I think ultimately it will be time, but then taking time out to try and process things. But we know that it will take a very, very long time, a very long time.
Now, the community last year decided to choose hope over hate. But how has the community been managing since? Have you guys been doing?
We still believe that. You know, this is a holiday resort town. People come to sunny Southport, and they have been doing for generations and generations. And I think for us, that's what we want to encourage people to do. The only way that we can repair from what's happened is by inviting people to come back to our town and enjoy themselves again. And you know, our three beautiful girls who are no longer with us would have grown up in this town like so many. And I think that we need to do it for them and for their families, for people to come back and see us again and be part of the wonderful community that was always there and that will always be here.
Indeed. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We really do appreciate it. Thank you. Welcome back to Southport, where the community is once again coming together on a day many were forced to relive the horror of what happened here last July. The seaside town was quick to support each other after the attacks and held peaceful vigils. Many have helped raise tens of thousands of pounds for the victims and their families. Here's our North of England reporter, Amy Welsh, on how Southport is standing together.
Thank you, Nick. Sorry, I'm just catching up through the chat and pinning the comments. Yeah, I'll see you here later. We'll probably be bombarded with assholes in my live later. All right, just putting it out there, just so we can be ready. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate you. So obviously, as you can hear, you know, I mean, it doesn't just affect the people who were there. It affects the people that live there. And the thing is, in the back of your mind, especially when you come from an area where this could happen, or you were part of something that could happen, in the back of your mind, you're always going to be thinking, is there another one out there just sat at home, ready to just do something? Because when you think about the location of where this was, he did his research. Like, he must have specifically looked for something like that, because that was tucked out of the way. It's not like he went into the nearest school, because obviously they were shut at this point. But previous to that, it's not like after he failed the first time of going to his old school that he went to the next school. And the thing is, this is where we end up in problems, and we're going to start seeing things happening in schools. It's scary.
It was a dark day for this seaside town, but the cloud that hung over Southport soon cleared, because this was a community determined to shine bright despite the pain.
Further along, you will find buckets which haven't got quite as many flowers in.
82-year-old Mike Ainscoe tended to the teddies outside his house, sheltering them from the rain.
Where did you put all these teddies?
Literally all the way around the room. They came from the garden on garden chairs. I think it meant a lot to the children, who donated, in many instances, their favourite toy to it. But when I put a teddy on a chair and so forth, I made sure another one was in its arms, in effect, so there was holding it. It's guarding it, it's cuddling it, it's keeping it safe.
The local mosque does now have extra security and admits being attacked left them shaken. But broken walls and windows won't break their spirit.
Well, what it has done, and I have to say this quite strongly, is that it's brought the community together. I personally don't feel threatened, but I'm a little bit more cautious.
The clean-up was rapid, but rebuilding Southport's reputation as a tourist town where people once flocked is proving a struggle, with profits at Pleasureland down 70%.
We need the people to come back and support Southport, and we understand their feelings, but please come back and support Southport.
If they don't, what then?
If they don't, there will be no more Southport.
And while the shock sank in, school pupils carried on.
It was strange to go on with my daily life after that. Everyone's gotten together as a community, and everyone helped to, rebuild the things that were broken. On the 29th of July, 2024, our community was changed forever.
This film, their way of making sense of the senseless.
This absolute unthinkable thing has happened on their doorstep in their community with children and families that they know. So we all came together and we changed the narrative. We talked about all of the positive things that happened in our community.
Earlier this week, the Prime Minister said the Southport murders must be a line in the sand. And while the town's tide is turning, it'll take time to heal. Amy Welch, ITV News, Southport.
And that brings our programme to a close from Southport, on a day where the full horror of what this seaside town was subjected to last summer was realised in full. The lives of so many changed in one morning in the most horrific way because of one teenager. What his sentencing brings to the victims' families and the survivors, well, it's too early to tell. But for this town, the scars will last for some time. Its grief palpable. But it's a strong community here who last summer chose hope over hate, and that continues, fueled by the shining lights that were Elsie, Bibi and Alice, 3 young girls who will remain etched in the hearts of this community forever. Julie will be here at 10 with the latest.
I have too many things to click. I'm like, so obviously, let me just get rid of that. So obviously, we know when this happened that on social media, content creators, average people that aren't content creators, start to post out information about this person. I didn't, because until you get a name on someone, you should never post the name publicly like that. And I can say that I did not post the name that was put out there, and I did not put the false information because we didn't have any. And I've had this in my lives when we've been, covering cases, and people will come in and say, "Oh, I know who it is," and I'm like, "I don't want to know. I'm not going to put the name out there until it's confirmed by the police and we have a wanted name, because if we get that wrong, then that person could be in danger." Same as the person that was being accused of being a peddler on TikTok yesterday. Had all these people after him, and they were going on a clip that had been doctored without fact checking. And that kind of thing can get people hurt or even killed, especially when we're talking peddlers. So, got to be careful when we're on the social medias, right? Okay, let's go to Judge. He's not actually called Judge. He's called Justice Goose. Now, I will just give you a warning if you haven't seen this before. The judge mentions a little bit about some of the injuries. I've heard this will be the 3rd time I've heard this, so it's not as much of a shock to me, but it's not nice to hear. So I'm just giving you that warning now, just in case you kind of don't want to hear it. It's very horrible. Okay.
During this sentence hearing, Axel Rudakubana was determined to disrupt the proceedings so that he would not have to face the victims of his crimes and justice. I was required to have him removed from court, not because that is what he wanted, but he was preventing the hearing from being held in the normal way. Accordingly, I passed sentence in his voluntary absence, whilst his counsel, both leading and junior, and solicitor are present in court. On the 29th of July last year, Rudakubana left home and travelled by taxi to the Hart Space in Hart Street, Southport, armed with a large kitchen knife, which he had bought on the internet on the 13th of July, 16 days earlier. He knew that there was to be a Taylor Swift-themed yoga and dance workshop where very young girls, mostly aged between 6 and 11, were to enjoy an organised party safely in an upstairs room where the organisers were to look after him. There were 26 children at the party, all of them happy and enjoying themselves. It started at about 9:30 that morning on a warm summer's day, but he had targeted those very young children for the horrific he was intent upon. At 11:45 that morning, he arrived and walked straight into the building, up the stairs to where he could hear the sound of happy children. In his mind with the intention to murder as many of them as he physically could. He wanted to try and carry out mass murder of innocent, happy young girls. And over about 15 minutes, he savagely killed 3 of them and attempted to kill 8 more, as well as 2 adults who tried to stop him. It was of such extreme violence, of the utmost and exceptionally high seriousness, that it is difficult to comprehend why it was done. I'm sure that Rudakubana had a settled and determined intention to carry out these offences, and that had he been able to, he would have killed each and every child, all 26 of them, as well as any adults who got in his way. It was only because some managed to escape that prevented many more from being murdered. I'm also sure that after the other children, 8 of whom he had very seriously injured, managed to escape, it left him in the upstairs room and landing, where he returned to continue his sustained and brutal violence against 2 of the youngest of those children, stabbing them multiple times. That demonstrated how determined he was to cause the maximum suffering he could. Left alone with them where they'd fallen, he continued shocking and extreme violence. Many who have heard the evidence summarised by the prosecution in this hearing, and having seen the CCTV recordings played with a view from the outside of the building, might describe what he did as evil. Who could dispute it? But on any view, it was at least the most extreme, shocking, and exceptionally serious crime. In describing the injuries caused to each of the victims, I will summarise the evidence, being conscious that the families of Elsie Stancombe, B.B. King, and Alice de Silva Aguiar are in court, as are the families of each of the other victims. It's necessary, however, in sentencing, briefly to refer to the injuries. Elsie Stancombe was aged only 7 when Rudakubana inflicted at least 85 sharp force injuries to her head, face, neck, torso, and upper limbs. Severe force was used to cause her death. B.B. King was aged only 6 when he inflicted at least 122 sharp force injuries to her head, face, neck, torso, and upper limbs. It was the opinion of Dr. Seeker, the pathologist, that Rudakubana had tried to decapitate her. He concluded that severe force was used to kill her. Alice de Silva Aguiar was aged 9 when he stabbed her, including a chop wound to her head and 4 stab wounds to her back, causing substantial internal injury. Although she managed to escape out of the building, she collapsed, and despite all medical help, she died in hospital at 1:20 in the morning the following day.
I'm just going to move that a little bit because I've had this.
We are just listening to the judge's remark.
Just them talking while cameras were off. I did this first time. I've heard this 3 times. It's the first time. It might be because I've got my headphones in, but there was somebody who did make a noise in the courtroom when he was talking about the decapitation. Just let that sink in for a minute, guys. 122 on one victim. 122. All of those injuries in a short space of time on those girls is horrific. Here we go.
They were there to outline. They said the most significant factor was the fact that he was just 17. We've got the live feedback. Let's listen in.
Rudakubana attacked her also. She did all she could before escaping, but suffered 5 stab wounds to her head, neck, back, shoulder blade, and arm. She required a blood transfusion. She also suffered fractures to a spinal vertebrae, a rib, a shoulder blade, and all caused by severe force. And Jonathan Hayes was an adult working in a different part of the upstairs to the building. After he heard the disturbance, he went out and was attacked with a knife. Rudakubana stabbed him in the leg, causing a deep wound as he tried to kill him. He was only saved when another witness appeared. I have read each of the victim personal statements, and many have been read out to the court. They are all deeply moving. The harm that Rudakubana has caused to each family, each child, and to the community has been profound and permanent. For the families of Elsie, Bibi, and Alice, they will never recover from what happened to their daughter. For those children and the adults that he attempted to murder, their lives will never be the same, nor will their families who are left to look after their exceptionally brave daughters. Also for the emergency services whose personnel had to deal with the aftermath. In just under 15 minutes, Rudakubana.
Not only the aftermath of the Southport stabbings, the victims, and what they saw there, they then had to go and deal with the riots afterwards.
Murdered 3 children, attempted to murder 8 other children, and also 2 adults. He was prevented from murdering more only by the escape of the other children. When the police arrived at about 12 noon, they found...
To be honest, I think if you are a crime correspondent, I mean, she did get a little bit upset to start with, and then she pulled herself together. But I think when you are a crime correspondent, it's really, really hard. It is hard, but you do it for them. You do it for the people that you're talking on and talking about. And I think a certain kind of person goes in for that line of work because they can give empathy while they're talking about the case, obviously, and they can hold it together. Now, it's like when we cover it. Now, some things, you know, sit with you more than other things. And where, you know, some people do get emotional when they're talking about cases and stuff. Not very many people do get too emotional. They kind of do what they need to do. And then obviously they just mull stuff over in their head. Like I always have a load of things going. That's probably why I don't sleep well. But I just always have things in my head. But we try and do our best to give you the information. More often than not, I'll just be more quiet than I will be more vocal. And then things will just sort of sit with me. And then, you know, tomorrow we start again and we might be continuing with the case, or we might be on a different one. But you just, you know, you've got to do it for the people, the voice that you're being for the people that you're talking about and the cases that you're talking about. You know, it's not an easy job, especially when you're on camera as well. Being on camera is a whole new, you know, a whole different ball game. But yeah, we are you know, we are human, and you know, she's probably getting a lot more information than what we've had. I mean, when I heard about the injuries the first time, I weren't even on live, and I had a few hours to kind of let that sink in before I went live. But yeah, it was hard. It was hard to hear for sure, definitely.
Found him standing over the body of B.B. King and still holding the knife. It was B.B. who had suffered at least 122 separate knife wounds. He was arrested, taken into custody, and whilst Rudakubana did not say anything in his police interviews, he did make unsolicited comments which are deeply disturbing, including, quote, "I'm glad to see those kids are dead. It makes me happy," close quote, and, quote, "It's a good thing those children are dead," close quote. In his home, the police discovered clear evidence of a settled intention to carry out mass killing. On one of his computers were files proving that he had a long-standing preoccupation with violent killing and genocide. Of particular significance were copies of an Al-Qaeda training manual, which described methods of killing with a knife and where to attack the victim. Part of it referred to attacking the head and neck, just as he had done to some of the victims in this case.
And can I just say, for those of you that don't know, I mean, most of you probably do, but there will be people that don't use TikTok, but that Al-Qaeda manual One click, it's yours. You can download it. I found it. I put in the title. It came up. I clicked on it. It was there. That's how easy that was.
Also, the manual provided instruction on how to produce ricin, a highly dangerous toxin, which can cause multiple deaths and has no known antidote. I am sure that he had followed those instructions because the police found in his bedroom the materials to produce ricin and a pulp residue within a container. That was examined by an expert in chemical and biological warfare agents, Dr. Martin Pierce, and confirmed it was ricin pulp and castor oil. His opinion was that there was sufficient ricin pulp that with some further purification process, it would have provided a range of up to 1,269 doses, which would cause death if inhaled. However, there was no evidence that Rudakubana had recently tried purification. I am satisfied that for some time he had planned to kill as many people as he could, as the prosecution have called it, quotes, a mass killing. He bought the knife he wanted to use, which had a particularly sharp point. He had read information on how to stab people with greatest effect to kill them. He saw the publicity for a children's party in Southport at the Heart Space Dance Studio and decided to kill as many as he could, targeting very young children. I'm also satisfied that if he hadn't decided that way of killing, in time he was highly likely to use the ricin he had produced. The prosecution have made it clear that these proceedings were not acts of terrorism within the meaning of the terrorism legislation, because there is no evidence that Rudakubana's purpose was to advance political, religious, racial, or ideological cause. I must accept that conclusion.
I think we can say that the fact that he was reading all this content, that he downloaded the Al-Qaeda manual, and that he had a fascination with obviously brutality, murder, and everything else that goes along with that. That's ideological. He's got an ideology of hurting people, murdering them. I think we could probably make that fit that bracket for that very reason. And the fact that although we didn't necessarily aspire to a specific religion, he had the ideology from reading different things and taking on the different role, like seeing what they do, to try and actually probably figure out what suited his motives the best. And in doing so, he's probably then thought, well, I am going to do this because I've got the ideology that I want to murder. I'm just not sure which ideological, which belief that it is that I want to be a part of. But I do have the ideology that I am going to take the lives because I have ideologies about murdering and dead people. And I just need to know really where I fit. Who am I going to do it for? Actually, no, you know what? I'm not going to do it for anyone. I'm going to do it for me. Simple as that. That's what we're dealing with.
However, in my judgment, his culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose.
Exactly.
Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation that it must be viewed as being at the very extreme level of crime. His culpability and the harm he caused and intended were at the highest.
I mean, I really think the judge should be having a really strong Liverpudlian accent, but he actually doesn't, because we're at Liverpool Crown Court. Do you know what? When I think about all the different courts and all the different sentences that I've heard, I don't actually think when I've listened to them, depending on where they are, a lot of them don't have the accent from the courts that they're in. Just an observation. I mean, it's just an observation. It's random.
I do not, however, take into account against him what happened in different parts of the country after his arrest. He did not cause that. Axel Rudakubana was born in Cardiff on the 7th of August of 2006. He's a UK citizen, now aged 18, but was still 17 when he committed these offences. He was only 9 days short of his 18th birthday, which has a particular significance. Had he been 18, I make it clear that I would have been compelled to impose on him life imprisonment without a minimum term, otherwise known as a whole life term, meaning that he would never be released. However, the law does not permit such a sentence for those offenders who are under 18 when they offend. Rudakubana has only one previous conviction, on the 19th of February 2020, when he was aged 13, for possession of a knife on school premises, assault, and possession of an offensive weapon in a public place. He was made subject to a juvenile referral order. Those offences took place when he returned to the school from which he'd been excluded due to his previous behaviour. He entered the school without permission, carrying a knife and hockey stick, intent on attacking another pupil, whom he said had bullied him. For the offence of murder on counts 1, 2, and 3, the sentence must be custody for life. I'm required to fix the minimum term which he must serve in custody before he may apply to the parole board for his release. It will be for the board to decide if he is ever safe to be released into the community, and if ever he is, he will remain on licence for the rest of his life, subject to recall into custody if he breaches his licence terms. The minimum term I will fix will be a very substantial one, and the very least he will be detained, which will mean that he will serve almost the whole of his life in custody. I consider at this time that it is likely he will never be released, and that he will be in custody for all his life. The starting point in deciding the minimum term in custody on counts 1 to 3 must be 27 years, because he was 17 years old when he murdered Elsie, Bibi, and Alice. I find the following circumstances make those murders yet more serious. Firstly, there are 2 exceptionally high factors that would, but for his age, require me to impose a whole life term. The murder of 2 or more persons where each murder involved a substantial degree of premeditation or planning, and it was in each case the murder of a child with such premeditation or planning. Secondly, the children were particularly vulnerable because of their very young age, being 7, 6, and 9.
Hopefully, when he leaves, if he survives that long in prison, hopefully he'll come out in a wheelchair or something, because they'll have taken his legs or something. I don't know, it's just a thought crossed my mind.
9 respectively. Thirdly, the physical suffering that he caused as he repeatedly stabbed them. Fourthly, there were 3 murders. Fifthly, at the time he carried out these murders, he also attempted to kill 10 more, 8 of whom were also very young children. Sixthly, the severity of the injuries caused to the victims. Seventhly, he produced highly toxic poison ricin, which he was very likely to use at some time had he not committed these offences. In mitigation for this offending, Rudakubana is still only 18 years old. However, I consider that his age has already provided him with a substantial reduction in his sentence, because it means that he has avoided a whole life term. Whilst he has entered guilty pleas, saving the families and victims the pain of a trial, he cannot claim to have shown any remorse. His unsolicited comment.
Yeah, sorry, that's why I before I ever do anything, if I'm going to clap back at someone, I need a minute to think about it, so that I don't go off track, or I don't ever go on and jump off. Sometimes we're human, and I have spoken, and my brain's just gone with it, and I don't think sometimes before I speak, but I'm human, and that's why for the most part I don't come on ranting and raving. I'll go away and think about it, then talk about it, so that I've got my points to a T. And then, like, if I'm invited on to a box, because I was today, and I was just like, no, I'm not going to be jumped on by a bunch of twats, and 2, I need to be responsible about what I'm going to say, rather than just responding with what my brain leaks out before my mouth listened to my brain pass the leak So if I leak something, then the sensible thing comes a bit later. I'd rather wait and then do the sensible thing. But sometimes, especially when I'm doing these, sometimes my brain just says it as it is. But when we're talking about murderers of children, that's okay. I don't have an issue with that.
In the police station made clear his feelings. However, lack of remorse is not an aggravating factor. I have read evidence within a statement of an assistant head teacher which describes how Rudakubana's early years at school developed from a normal student to one who became increasingly threatening to those he felt had wronged him, leading to his exclusion. None of this gives any indication of what he was to do on the 29th of July last year. I have read the intermediary assessment report dated the 24th of September 2024, in which its author said that he presented as having high-functioning autism and that he does not have any associated learning disabilities. The report found that he had some communication and attention difficulties. None of this offered any explanation for this offending. No further expert evidence has been provided on his behalf. I've taken into account the overarching principles sentencing children and young people. The fact that he's now 18 years old does not make the guideline irrelevant. However, I'm not persuaded that his emotional age is different to his chronological age. I will give him the appropriate discount to reflect the fact that whilst almost 18, he was still young. In sentencing, I will impose concurrent sentences, meaning they will all be served at the same time. However, I will treat the murder offences in counts 1 to 3 as the lead offences and take into account all of the total of current sentences of custody for life under
I pressed some wrong buttons, guys. Apologies.
Section 272 of the Sentencing Act 2020. Each offence is within Schedule 19 of the Act. I'm satisfied in the circumstances of these offences that Rudakubana is a dangerous offender and that the circumstances justify the imposition of a life sentence. I must then fix the custodial term which he must serve. For each of the offences where he attempted to murder a child, being counts 4 to 11, the appropriate sentence guideline is category A2 with a starting point for sentence of 30 years and a range up to 35 years. The very young age of each victim and the substantial planning by him requires me to increase that sentence to the top of the range before reducing it to reflect his age, his late guilty plea, and to reach the minimum term for these offences. Accordingly, I firstly reduced the sentence to 30 years for his age and 27 years for the guilty plea, leading to a minimum term of 18 years on each of counts 4 to 11 concurrently. On counts 12 and 13, which are attempted murder of the adults, Leanne Lucas and Jonathan Hayes, the guideline category is B2 with a starting point of 25 years and a range up to 30 years. With the same aggravating factors of seriousness and mitigation for counts 4 to 11, I increased the sentence to 30 years before reducing it to 27 years for age and to 24 years for guilty plea, leading to a minimum term on those two counts of 16 years concurrently. I now turn to the remaining counts. On count 14, having an article with a blade, the sentence is 18 months custody. This is a category 1A offence, which I have reduced the sentence to reflect his age and plea. Count 15, production of a biological
How do you know about the big red button out the back here?
toxin. There is no offence-specific sentence guideline. I've been assisted by reference to the case of the Crown against Mohammed Ammar Ali, 2016 EWCA Crim 864, in which a sentence of 8 years imprisonment after conviction was upheld by the Court of Appeal, the decision based upon its own facts. I'm satisfied that His production in this case of ricin was more advanced and is associated with Rudakubana's mindset to cause many killings, whilst he had not used the ricin by the time of his arrest, taking into account his culpability and the harm risked, allowing for his age and guilty plea, I sentence him concurrently to 12 years custody. Count 16, possession of a document likely to be useful to a person preparing an act of terrorism. The sentence is 18 months custody after taking into account his age and plea and applying the guideline category 3C. I'm now going to sentence Axel Rudakubana, having explained my reasons. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years, less the time he's served already. He's been in custody for 175 days on remand, which will be credited. Therefore, the minimum term is 51 years and 190 days. On counts 4 to 11, I sentence him concurrently to custody for life with a minimum term of 18 years, less 175 days served, on each count concurrently with each other. Allowing for his time served on remand, the minimum term on those counts is 17 years and 190 days. On counts 12 and 13, I sentence him concurrently to custody for life with a minimum term of 16 years, less his time served on remand, on each count concurrently with each other, leading to a minimum term on those counts of 15 years and 190 days. On counts 14 and 16, I sentence him to 18 months custody concurrently with each other and all other offences. He will pay the appropriate amount under he will pay the appropriate amount under 18 statutory charge, which will be entered on the court record. Accordingly, in total, I sentence Rudakubana to 13 sentences of custody for life and a minimum term to be served in custody of 51 days and 190 days. It is highly likely that he will never be released.
And we didn't even get to hear the judge say, take him down. I love hearing that. Take him down. Take the bastard down. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because as far as I'm concerned, his behaviour was an act of terrorism. He's got the ideologies of hurting people. He's got the ideology of murdering people. He just wasn't specifically subscribed to one particular terrorist organisation that's taken religion to the extreme. So he didn't know who or what he believed and where to take it to its extreme. So he probably could have created his own extreme religion. However, we are where we are with him. And like I said, he's been handed down one of the heaviest of sentences for someone of his age. This is where I do wish we had the death penalty. He would have been an absolute DP case for me. You know, the making of ricin, well, you know, I mean, that's an act of terror, isn't it? I mean, yeah, it wasn't specifically going for a specific government. But I mean, what concerns me is how the bastard had it stored. He had it stored in a bloody Tupperware container with his family in the house. Like, what the hell? He could have killed so many people in and around the vicinity because he had it in a bloody Tupperware container. Yeah, I mean, what is the point of concurrent sentences realistically? I could see it if he was a whole life tariff, but then Lucy Letby got like multiple whole life tariffs. I mean, once you've got one whole life tariff, let's face it, you're not leaving, are you? But if you've got a whole life order, then you know it's you'd want to say concurrently. But just to make sure that the dickhead couldn't get out of prison, you'd want to say consecutively to add that little bit of extra time on there. Because at the end of the day, to me, I kind of feel like by doing that, it lessens what's gone on for everybody else as well. Because yes, It's tragic. The 3 girls were murdered. There was 10 attempted murders of the other people. And for not giving them consecutive sentences and making everything concurrent and with his terroristic behaviour, that should have been dealt with a whole separate thing, because the whole Rice and Al Qaeda manual was completely different to what he did. And again, that could have been added on to his time. I personally don't think he's rehabilitable. I don't think he's coming out of prison anytime soon. I honestly think that we will never see him out. If he does get out, he'll be in his 70s. And then people will probably be chasing him with a sharp-bladed weapon just to get him back. But who knows? So we'll have to see what happens with this appeal, guys, because they are putting in an appeal for an unduly lenient sentence. And I do think that some of these could have been concurrent. And, you know, I do think that this is exceptionally heinous. And the fact that there was the element of preparing for an act of terror with the rice in, whether it was, you know, for some, you know, terrorist group or not, or whether it was for his own purposes, he was still prepared to do that and put a whole bunch of lives at risk. And so I personally think he could have qualified for a whole life order. 9 days, really? Just because of 9 days? And I think because there was 9 days, and because it was exceptionally heinous, and because there was the potential terror element to this, he should have got a whole life order. So fingers crossed, that could still happen. I mean, I'm not hopeful that the appeal will go through, but we'll see. We'll see. Usually when there's been a sentence, it's really hard to get it changed in any way. Although they did with Star Hobson's mother, didn't they? They upped hers from 8 to 12 years, although she was in a bit of a more nicer setting. It does send the wrong messages to others. It's a bit like Gypsy Rose's Book of Bollocks, isn't it? With everything that we've learned about Gypsy Rose and the fact that her mum was diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy in her death, which you can't do, all because her lawyer said, well, she had Munchausen's by proxy with no proof. And then apparently it's now since come out on a voice in text messages between her and her older neighbour, Aaliyah. So this is how old this goes back. Gypsy knew she had the microdeletion problem. But it gives the message to kids, hey, go kill your mum. We'll give her a diagnosis of Munchausen's by proxy because we can when they're dead, apparently. And then Melissa Moore or someone of the equivalent's going to come while you're in prison. They're going to start plugging your story, and then you're going to make millions off or bucks, thousands, hundreds of thousands of what you did, and then you're going to become a social media influencer for about 5 minutes because you're a beauty school dropout, because she wasn't very good at the beauty side of influence either. She just couldn't be Nina, and so she failed at that. And obviously she got backlash once people started to see the truth and what actually happened and the real information. People saw what they were looking at. Now she's going to have blind followers, right? Because people do. People blindly follow people, even when you wave the evidence in front of them. You cannot help those people, and they want to make that choice to love that person. That's up to them. But it does send the wrong message out. Absolutely does send the wrong message out. So with that, I'm going to go and get a hot bath because I'm freezing cold. Then I'm going to get back, because by the time I've had my bath and that, right, it's going to be about 9, half 9. Time I get comfy in that and get my coffee and sorted. It's going to be near 10 o'clock, I reckon, probably 9:30, 10. So just putting it out there for the triggered. Obviously it's evening time now, and I've been out and about of my bed today, as I was on Thursday and Wednesday and Tuesday and Monday. But I'll be back in my bed around that time, so be triggered. Okay. Lots of love, and I will see you guys soon. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the super chats that you have sent. I'm still getting used to what goes on here. I much prefer this layout. I'm going to have to start saving up for a laptop. I don't want to because I've got a MacBook, right? I love my MacBook. But if I can get the bloody Android system going, then I can stream like this on TikTok because I can have live studio. They keep saying, hey, you can have live studio. And I'm like, hey, fuck off. No, I can't. No, I can't because you don't allow for MacBook Pros and stuff to stream, only Android. So go fuck yourself. And I keep holding off because it's just something I don't want to do. But I love this format where I'm a small person, you get the content. And it really frustrates me that I can't do that on TikTok and we have to do the fanny arsing around bit that we have to do so you guys can watch stuff. But we'll get there. We'll always get there in the end. And I will see you guys soon. Have a good rest of your day. And see you in a bit, guys. Take care. Love you all. Bye.